First major topic of today is the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. So what does it do? We deploy Windows operating systems. In theory, it can go all the way back to Windows XP. So if you're still deploying Windows 7 or for whatever reason you're using Windows 8, you can use MDT to deploy that. Inside college, we're now moving exclusively over to Windows 10, so no more Windows 7. It does the initial installation of applications. So it's that initial copy of Office going onto the machine, or maybe Adobe Acrobat or Google Chrome, anything that you're installing at the time of deploying the operating system. It's not designed to manage the applications on the machine later. However, you can manually invoke those installations if you desire. If you are happy running a PXE server inside your environment, which certainly makes life a lot easier, you can run MDT over a network boot, and then it basically grabs all the files that it needs to install the operating system and the applications via a network share. Equally so, if you've got some niche cases whereby maybe you've got a machine that doesn't like to network boot for some strange and interesting reason, you can take the boot image, it comes as an ISO, copy that onto either a DVD or a USB memory stick, and then connect out to the network share. And equally so, if you've got a very large capacity memory stick, you can run MDT as an isolated environment on that memory stick without requiring any external resources whatsoever, and deploy operating systems straight off a USB, DVD, whatever you happen to be using. We use it as a single operating system image. So instead of maintaining a copy of Windows that's exclusively designed for the students, a copy that's designed for the staff, a copy that's designed to go on different machines, we take the very bare Windows copy, stick it straight into MDT, and then apply our modifications through MDT instead of capturing the image, uploading it onto the server and deploying that image. With the way that Windows is going now with 6 monthly releases, if you want to take part in those 6 monthly releases, this really makes life a lot easier for it. And then driver packs for machines come from all the major OEMs, of course, so Dell, Lenovo, HP, and we mainly use Dell and Lenovo within the college. There's a couple of alternatives, of course. So Windows Deployment Services is free straight out of the box with Microsoft Windows Server, and there's loads of other pieces of software out there that you might be using in your own environments as well. It's important to note that some of these applications are also there to manage the operating system after you've deployed it. So Altaris, we're really just focusing on MDT's ability to deploy the operating system. System Center Configuration Manager, if you've got the time, is really worth the investment. It can do pretty much anything to any machine on the planet. So the installation, what you're effectively spinning up is a file server. In our environment, we're running it with just 2 gigabytes of RAM. Really doesn't need too much to go. So the first thing we're going to need on our server, so we've spun up a new server dedicated to deploying operating systems, is to get hold of the Automated Deployment Toolkit, or ADK. Now throughout the course of today, I've got videos that show how to do these different steps. I'll narrate the ones as we necessarily go along. Unfortunately, this one really is just a case of going to the website, clicking download and getting hold of that copy and spinning it up. Now, let's see how further I went through this. It's really a next wizard. Eventually you'll get asked loads of questions as to what applications or what features of the ADK you want to install, and we just want the default ones, so click install and you'll be away. So next, installing the Windows Deployment Services role on the Windows Server. We're going to use PowerShell to do that. Kick it off as an administrator. Install -Windows feature is what we're going to be using. And we're after the WDS role. And that'll go off and install on your server itself. This way you don't have to interact with the GUI too much. There's less chance of you going, ooh, that looks interesting. I'll choose that, and that as well, and then go and screw up your server. So as much as you can, use PowerShell to deploy these tools. We've got an entire talk on PowerShell coming up next, so for the time being we won't worry about this one too much. So, configuring DHCP on our server. So this is our domain controller which is handing out DHCP to our machines. We're going to set it up such that it's got a scope option to point any clients that talk to that DHCP server off to our deployment server. So as you're there spamming F12 to get Windows to network boot, by putting option 66 inside there, it knows where to go to actually deploy its operating system. So we need an Active Directory account for WDS and MDT to deploy our computers. This is going to be a service account. So I'm going to set a nice strong password, which probably when I was setting this up was password123 with a capital P, might I add. Make sure the user can't change the password and doesn't change the password at the next login, and the account should never expire. Right, once we've done that, there's a wonderful tool we can download from the Microsoft TechNet Gallery, which effectively sets the correct permissions on the organizational units inside Active Directory, so that account can only domain join machines. It's not there to do anything else. Again, it's another little bit of PowerShell. Make sure you unblock the script before attempting to run it, otherwise you'll just get a load of red text. And once we run PowerShell as an administrator, we're going to point it at that script and provide it with both the name of the account and the path to the organizational units that we want to set these settings against. So we've changed the directory. We're going to kick off the script. We're going to put our service MDT account inside there. Now target OU, we're just after the OU path, we're not after the domain name. So under domain computers, attribute editor, distinguished name, we can grab that straight from there. We're just after the OU, not the domain name. Now we're going to use this to both join domain computers and domain servers. So I've set up two different organizational units for that purpose. And you get a nice bit of debug text once you've done. If we look at the security tab, we can now see that account's been added in there, and it's only added the permissions it needs. We will also be using this account a little bit later to connect out to the deployment share as well. So that's when MDT is running on your machine. That's it saying this is where I need to go and get my copy of Office or other such software. And we've applied the same to the domain servers as well. So let's get MDT itself installed. You can download it from this link from Microsoft, again on TechNet. Microsoft have now started getting MDT pushed out at the same release cadence as Windows itself. And in this case, we're going to get the 64-bit version of the tools. Of course, Microsoft's website never makes it quite that easy if you're using even the most basic of pop-up blockers. So we'll go to download manually and just get the link that they should have given us in the first place. MDT itself is really small. It's kind of under 20 megabytes in size. It really is just a load of scripts and a Microsoft Management Console plugin. I think we're going to make ourselves wait for that one to pop up. So you know, a little under 20 megabytes. And again, it's just a next install. Opt into the Customer Experience Improvement Program, should you so wish. Send Microsoft all your data. And that is how fast it installs because it's such a small piece of software. So the initial setup of MDT. I'm going to find it from Start menu under Microsoft Deployment Toolkit and Deployment Workbench. It does require elevation to run. And we're going to be focusing around deployment shares. Useful to pin it to your taskbar on your server as well. So deployment share is where it's going to keep all its settings. We're going to save that to C. Deployment share is just a useful place. And I'm going to remove the $ as well to make it a visible share instead of a hidden one, just to make life a little bit easy. There's a couple of settings that it'll ask you about. Most of the time I just completely ignore them and untick all the boxes because we want things like BitLocker to be installed and set up on the machine by default. That copies over its scripts. It's worth noting you can have multiple deployment shares if you have a good reason to. Most of the time you'll just keep it all under a single deployment share, as we've done here. Now once we expand that, we can see the different options that MDT has. So our option to set up applications, operating systems, the drivers, and the task sequences themselves, which is kind of the core of MDT. This is the list of what to do when deploying Windows. So next, deploying the ISO for Windows. We can get this off downloads.it.ox.ac.uk, of course. And that's a big old ISO, which we won't wait for it to download. Once that's completed, you want to mount the ISO. You can do that in Windows simply by double clicking on it. Is this video going to run? My first video where I forgot to set it to play automatically. There we go. Just mount the ISO, launch the MDT console, head to operating systems once it wakes up. Right click and import operating system. Now we want the full set of source files because there's some files inside that ISO that we need for MDT to be able to deploy operating systems, mainly focusing around ImageX. So we're going to point it at that directory and let it work its magic. And as it goes and downloads all those files from that ISO into its deployment share, the main one, or the biggest one, is going to be that install.wim. So that's where the files to actually install Windows are. And then there's some supporting files around there, like the ImageX tool, like sysprep and such like, which MDT can use for its own internal purposes. Now, once it's imported that ISO, we'll then see all the different operating systems that were inside that WIM file. In this case, that's Windows 10 for education, that's Windows 10 Enterprise, that's Windows 10 Professional. Well, we don't actually need all of those. Most of the time we stick with Windows 10 Enterprise. If you wish to, you can use education as well. I would seriously recommend you steer clear of Professional these days though, because Microsoft have been doing some fun and interesting things with the Pro version that allows them to update it without you having any control over it whatsoever. So we don't want the rest of those Windows installs, and we're just going to leave ourselves with Windows 10 Enterprise, which was part of that Windows 10 Education WIM file. So next we need some drivers from Dell. Dell have a very helpful website which provides us with driver packs in the form of cab files, which we can get hold of all the drivers for all the different versions of Dell machines, all the way back to the earliest ones indeed. So from that Dell website, we can do a quick Control and F to find the machine that we want. In this case, it's going to be a 7440 all-in-one. And we're going to hop through those, and there's a driver pack for Windows 10. These driver packs can vary in size from half a gigabyte all the way up to 2 gigabytes or more, especially if that machine would normally come with really complicated graphics cards. In this case, it's a little over 500 megabytes. In the form of Dell, they kick them out as cabinet files, which we can then extract using 7-zip or other tools that allow you to extract cab files. So, once that has completed its download, we're going to extract that driver file which we've saved, in this case just using 7-zip. It usually kicks up a couple of errors about there being weird data. It's a cab file, it's bound to happen. And if we start to explore that file as it extracts, we'll see it's got some Windows 10 64-bit drivers inside there. It's got audio drivers, those massive Realtek ones, which are like 100 megabytes and no one knows why. Thank you. And the video drivers, of course, which have a little bit more of a reason to be larger in size. All right, once we've done that, we need to import those drivers into MDT. Now, one important point to note is that your naming conventions that you use should reflect and match the model names of the computers that you're deploying them to. Good old PowerShell kicks in here, get WMI object, Win32 computer system. We want the manufacturer and the model. I ran this a little bit earlier on my machine here. It's a Lenovo, and that's its model number. Now, these numbers need to match, or these strings need to match exactly what you put into MDT later. Otherwise, when MDT goes to detect which drivers it should install, it won't know what to do. So, importing those drivers, we're going to create a folder structure. In this case, top level is going to be the name Dell. And make another structure beneath that, matching the machine that we're going to deploy it to. In this case, the 7440 all-in-one. Once we've done that, we're going to right click on the folder and kick off the import of those drivers. This will take a varying amount of time depending on how many drivers there are. And it will search inside that folder as well for any additional cab files that it might find of interest that the drivers might be saved as. Mainly it's looking for the INF files to say, hey, this is the supporting files that I need. On occasion you might see this throw a couple of errors and warnings. It's usually along the lines of the driver says it's a 64-bit driver, but its INF file says it's a 32-bit driver, and MDT doesn't know what to do. I've never encountered a situation where skipping past those has actually caused a problem, but if you find a problem to do with driver imports, it might be something to do with something along these lines. So we also run Lenovo laptops inside the college. They have a similar resource. The same applies to HP, Toshiba, and most of the other main suppliers as well. So Lenovo website. It's largely the same deal. We just search for the model that we're going to be deploying, in this case the 20HQ. It's an X1 Carbon laptop. They've got their driver packs. Similar sizes to the Dell ones, starting at 500 megabytes, going all the way up to a couple of gigabytes, depending on what the laptop does. A little note about these drivers, they actually come as an executable. If you try and extract that executable using 7-zip or many other tools, you'll just get a horrible mess, so you actually have to run that executable to extract the drivers. So once we've kicked that off, it'll choose a nice default place to save it, like C drivers. Now, one little note about these driver packs is they're actually mainly aimed at a piece of software called System Center Configuration Manager, which is effectively one step up in complexity against MDT. The same driver packs can be used in MDT. So if you're searching for driver packs for some obscure manufacturer of machine, try searching SCCM driver packs instead of MDT driver packs, because most of the time that's where we find them. So once that's extracted, it's the same with the Lenovo's. We need to create a folder structure which represents the name of the machine and the model number. I think I cheaped out here because I couldn't quite remember what the full model number is. So if it says just 20HC or 20HQ, no, I've just put X1 Carbon. I fix that later, so it's okay. Really is important, these structures are well named. Same deal after that, after you've extracted it, just point it at the file, start the copy up, and you can see all the types of drivers that are inside there, be they audio drivers or such like. So, selection profiles. This is the bit which MDT really does use to determine what drivers it's going to apply to the machine. So we've gone to Advanced Configuration, Selection Profiles, and we've created a selection profile which says, I'm going to use these drivers, and called it its appropriate name. And the same applies to the X1 Carbon as well, navigating through our structure. So once we've got all our drivers set up, let's import some applications into MDT. You can pretty much use any applications with MDT that you've got. Best if it's got a silent install script or a silent installer. If that's a MSI file, MSI exec, /I/ the name of the path, /Q, that will do a quiet installation most of the time. You can also apply these things called transforms to MSI files, which allow you to change things like where the application will actually be installed to, or what shortcuts you want. And there's a tool called Orca, which is free from Microsoft again, that allows you to modify those files. We won't look at that for this purposes, but we are going to look at the Google Chrome installer. So Google Chrome have an enterprise installer, or Google has an enterprise installer for Chrome, and we can download that MSI, 50 megabytes. It includes the Google Updater utility as well. And we just want to create a folder for that we're going to import it from and save that executable inside there. Once we're inside MDT, we're going to create a new application. It's going to be an application with source files, so we're going to point it at that folder. These bits are largely optional, just so long as you've got an application name inside there. Point it at that Google Chrome installation directory, and if you've got a particularly large application, you can opt to move the files instead of copy them. And this is where we put the command line in there that's going to install that application silently. In this case, msi exec /I. We then go back to figure out what the application is actually called, copy and paste that in, and then put /q at the end. Get a little confirmation everything's worked okay. If you've got applications that are like, well, anything from Microsoft Office to CorelDRAW, you can pretty much install them through this. After that, you can then use other utilities such as Windows Server Update services to patch and update those applications. So next, creating the task sequence, so the core of what MDT is at. So the task sequence, we're going to give it an ID and a name. In this case, just deploy or install Windows 10. It's going to be a client task sequence, but you can also use MDT to deploy server operating systems. I'm going to churn through the wizard and change it to the King's College, not the Queen's College. Set the admin password or the local admin password for the machine. That's going to be 123456 in this case. Ever so slightly better than 12345. We actually come round onto that in a second at the end of the day when OpenVAS actually detects that we've got a really insecure password in use on one of our machines as it attempts to brute force the computer. So we're going to inject the drivers for our Optiplex 7440 machine, and we're going to use that driver selection profile that we've created. This is the super important bit. We're going to add a task sequence variable. That's going to be model. It's got to equal exactly what you got out of the machine for its model name from that PowerShell script that we ran earlier. We're going to do the same for the Lenovo drivers. This is where I think I properly do it. Now, it is also possible, Microsoft have a script on the MDT website that allows you to avoid using selection profiles entirely. I've used it with limited success in the past, but you're welcome to give it a go. The link to that is a little bit later on. So again, task sequence variable is going to be model. It's going to equal exactly the right thing. Let's see what I type this time. Yep, I cheaped out. That will not work, I guarantee you. So after we've done that, we can then make any other changes to our task sequence that we need. It's important noting that Lenovo ones, you have to set it to install all drivers. Things like enabling Windows Update as part of the task sequence. So as the operating system is being deployed, you can tell it to reach out to Windows Update and ensure that once it's done, it's got the latest Microsoft updates on there. We do that before and after we install applications. So first, Windows will update itself, conduct a reboot if necessary, install any applications that it might need, like Office, and then update those afterwards as well. Go ahead.
Does it only do it for Microsoft servers? You set it to a WSUS server?
Yes, and a WSUS server as well, which is actually what we do in this wonderful load of fun and interesting things here. So WSUS server, in this case here, and that's it. Oh no, that's my pen, not my laser pointer. Where's my laser pointer gone? I do like my laser. There we go, lasers. So there we're pointing at our WSUS server, so if we've got our applications locally cached, it'll save it from there. So this wonderful mash of text is used to set certain things inside MDT that when you're actually deploying the operating system, you've already made some decisions for the user, making life a little bit easier. So things like setting the name or the organization name of the computer. Things like setting the admin password on the machine, you can change that for different task sequences. And then also doing things like domain joining it. So here we set it to join kings.ox.ac.uk. We set our service-mdt account that we're using later. Password for that account, unfortunately it's saved in plain text, so please protect your MDT servers. Closing the blinds. And you can do things like skipping unnecessary parts of the task sequence wizard, like if you were deploying an operating system for a server and you don't want to choose which roles that server is going to run at that time, you can say skip roles yes. One thing that I only recently found out actually is that you can, as part of the task sequence, provide a drop down to the user as to which organizational unit the machine should go into. And you just do that by putting domain OUs. Starting from 1, I think you've only got up to 10 options. and then putting the path to that OU inside there. So where do we actually use all this? So this is updating the deployment share. We're only going to use it for 64-bit. So we've got our custom settings file here, which you can use and modify as you see fit. And we're going to paste that in over there. There's another file that we need to modify as well called bootstrap.ini. And that's where we say what settings it should use to connect to the deployment share. Now we're going to build a 64-bit image of Windows pre-execution environment and also create an ISO. And also MDT has a monitoring and deployment service so that when you've got a machine deploying out in someone's office, you can check on the MDT server to see what its progress is instead of having to go to it constantly and check from there. Now the deployment share, we need to add our service MDT account as a read option on there. And it's not included in this video, but also make sure you set sharing permissions on that folder as well, such that when the machine is deploying, it can connect out to that share. After that, we need to actually create those images. That's a right click on MDT deployment share and update image directories. This will take half an hour or so, because what it's also doing is talking to all the drivers that you've imported into MDT, figuring out which ones are network and which ones are storage drivers, in particular if you've got some obscure machines, and making sure that those drivers are imported and injected into the actual deployment image. That way, when it network boots, it can also talk out over the network, it can talk to the storage that's inside the machine. We've seen in particular that with newer machines with the new NVMe drives, you really need to make sure you update the deployment share each time you import a new Dell PC or a new Lenovo laptop. So once that's done, it can take up to half an hour or so. You get a nice little confirmation to say that it's done. We can then find where those ISOs have been saved, where that image has been saved in the deployment share and boot folder. We've got our WIM file, which we can import into WDS, and also the ISO, which we could burn to a DVD or CD. We're going to kick off WDS, expand servers, right-click boot images, import image, and point it at that WIM file that MDT created for us. This again will take a couple of minutes or so to import. It's basically got to check over that 500 megabyte file and make sure everything is okay. So once we're at this stage, we're actually ready to deploy Windows to our computers, which should be a big sigh of relief because you just spent the last 2 hours playing around with text files and wondering what's going on. So let's deploy Windows to our computers. So we're going to start up this machine here, which is running inside Hyper-V. We're going to instruct it to network boot. Will work in other hypervisors as well, not just Hyper-V. Once it's kicked off, it will take us through a wizard. This wizard you can also password protect as well. And that's just a simple string, no username, just the password. And it'll ask us first, which task sequence do we want to run? So if we have multiple task sequences, for example, deploying Windows Server as well, we could select that from there. It'll then ask us for some details about that computer, such as what name it wants to use. If we had more applications in there, we could select them from that drop-down, and it then kicks off the task sequence process. From that point on, sit back, relax. In this case, I think the video takes about 17 minutes to run. Who was that? 1 second. Let's select not the laser pointer, and we'll skip around this a little bit. So we can see it installing the Windows operating system onto that machine. That zips by, especially if you've got a nice gigabit network to run it over. Once that's done, a couple of minutes later, it then goes through the outer box experience for Windows. Once it's finished doing that, it logs in as a local administrator onto the machine and kicks off Windows Update for you. as per our task sequence in a second or two. There we go, there it goes. Where's my mouse going? Installs any applications you might have selected as well. So in a second or so we should see Google Chrome go. And we get a nice little report as to what went well and what didn't go well. We set it so that when you hit finish, the machine instantly reboots. That's a little thing such that if someone comes across that computer whilst it's running its task sequence, hopefully they'll hit the finish button for us and save us a trip out there. Once that's done, you've got a completely deployed, ready to go Windows environment, 17 minutes in this case. For us at Queen's, including an installation of Office, including Sophos, including running appropriate Windows updates, it's usually about half an hour. So, final bits as to how we use MDT at Queen's. Any questions so far? Anyone think they might use this? General nod? Yeah. So, MDT at Queen's, we've got a number of different task sequences. Deploying our Hyper-V hosts, we haven't used that one in quite a while, so I should probably test it just in case. We use both Server 2016 in its core edition, which is the PowerShell only version effectively, and its graphical user interface version. We also have Windows 10 task sequences for our normal deployment, just Windows 10. We've got one for fellows' laptops, such as when they bring them to us, that doesn't domain join, but it does install appropriate applications suitable to their needs. We've also got one for our library terminals as well, so our OLIS, OPAC machines, whatever you want to call them. For convenience as well, if we ever forget to install an application as part of the task sequence, I've also made a task sequence which is really just install application. So you can make these task sequences, deploy operating systems, encrypt drives, or just install applications. You can do whatever you like with them, really. When you go to kick off the install application task sequence, obviously we're not needing to network boot from there, but if you head to deployment share and scripts as a suitable administrative account, you can kick off the lighttouch.vbs file, and that will give us that task sequence wizard to churn through. We use the Sophos Cloud client. Their quiet install is really sophos install.exe-q. So anything that you can silently install, you can use with that. We've got a default install for Adobe Reader DC as well. Sophos Cloud is inside there. Set KDCs for the Kerberos domain controllers. That really is just a little registry patch. So import the registry keys that we've set. And we set that to hide that application inside the deployment wizard so that no one needs to click on it. And it's just there, part of the task sequence already installed. So further reading from these guys. Lynda.com does have a video on how to set up a more complete MDT environment. There's proof of concepts there for how to deploy Windows 10 according to Microsoft's way of doing things, and so on. So, questions? Go ahead.
Can you import WIMs that have already been built?
Yes.
WDS?
Yep, so if you've already got a WDS server running and you've already got a WIM file, you can import that straight into MDT. Right-click operating systems. There's actually an option there which, if it's still sitting in the MDT server, you can point it straight at the MDT server and it will grab it from there. Now, not that we use WDS and MDT in that manner, but you can deploy an operating system, install applications onto it, and then capture that as an image. So if you were deploying 600-700 computers, as Mike and I will well remember, and you want to deploy those computers as fast as possible, that's another good way around it, because it's just sticking that image straight onto there. You're not having to wait for things to install. Anyone else? Stunned silence. Excellent.